I got all dolled up for it.
How to cross your legs. There was none of that training.
In the present moment, as we embrace the moment of now.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious, and don't call me Shirley.
Sometimes you stumble upon a speech that's just too powerful not to analyze. Meghan's speech at Women of Vision, where she received an award from people who are just as authentic as she is an example of that. And it's a beautiful thing when it happens. However, there are just a few problems with this speech. What are the problems, you ask? Well, the speech makes everyday events sound groundbreaking for self-serving reasons, and it's entirely superficial and without substance. Like I said, just a few problems. Let's compare some of the most heartfelt passages to inspiring interviews and speeches and charming documentaries and find out what all of this says about Meghan. If you want to help save language from buzzwords and platitudes, click the like button and subscribe to the channel. And be sure to click the notification bell for all updates. Let's get this empowering journey started. Meghan thanks Gloria, a so-called social political activist, and in doing so, she mentions that they're friends twice. She thanks Gloria for her incredible friendship. This isn't a standalone occurrence. In one of her meaningful podcasts, it was sensitive to Meghan to refer to Serena Williams as her dear friend, which is actually a strange thing for real dear friends to do. That was after Prince Harry happened to walk by and compliment the vibe of Serena's haircut. A touching moment for us all. When we compare this finding to other interviews and speeches where it's also sensitive to Meghan to associate herself with the right kind of people, a pattern starting to form.
So I'm really good friends with Jake Rosenberg, who's the creative director on it. And 4 days later, I got an email from one of the highest executives for UN Women saying they wanted to work with me. And there's a really big push for me to work with female entrepreneurs and then all the influencers that I interview on this site, be it friends or, high profile people.
Have any of you today so far had that feeling, that pinch me moment where you just go, how am I here? Surrounded by world leaders, humanitarians, prime ministers, and I was invited to pull up a seat at the table, being with some people that I admired most, including former President of Ireland, Mary Robinson, who you heard from earlier.
Implicitly, Meghan reveals how she's climbed the ladder by praising influential people and making sure to use superficial buzzwords so as to not offend these influential people who give each other titles and awards. Check this literally crazy interview for more about buzzwords. Meghan thanks the other honorees, which I'm totally convinced they all are, for their important and meaningful work. Important and meaningful are synonyms, by the way, but that's not the most redundant part though. The most redundant part is the nonsensical closing, especially as we all bear witness to you standing in elegance and the power of your strength. How does a person stand in the power of their strength? Because strength is power, and power is strength. This isn't only redundant, but also circular. That's what happens when someone's trying to make something sound good, but is actually saying nothing at all. Kind of like this.
And this week the world is watching as you cement your place in history by showcasing the good that you are doing today, in the present moment, as we embrace the moment of now to create a better tomorrow.
If you have an interpretation of this, please let us all know in the comments. However, I guess as long as Meghan says she feels the energy from each of the honorees, it's all fine. No need to specify the work they've supposedly done or what this energy is, aside from being a word that simulates closeness and authenticity. Meghan then turns the attention to her early years, as she has a habit of doing, and this is where the narrative in her brave speech begins. Almost all speeches have narratives today. Narratives are used by politicians and celebrities to make it seem like they're ordinary, just like the people they're trying to manipulate for money and influence. Identification is key in narratives, getting the audience to identify themselves with the protagonist in the narrative. In this case, Meghan. Meghan gives relatable details, in theory that is. such as settling in after a day in school, pulling up her TV tray with dinner, and turning on her evening ritual of Jeopardy, while glancing at the coffee table, the cat's collar, homework, some mail, and some magazines. Meghan could have just mentioned the magazines, because it's the magazines she goes on to talk about. This is how we know that all the other things she was allegedly glancing at are there to make people relate. She says there was a diversity, another buzzword, that she supposedly hadn't seen as often, with congresswomen, astronauts, and different topics from mothering to being a working mom. It's noteworthy that she's able to describe all of this so clearly, but then goes on to claim that she was too young at the time to know what most of it meant. So she was able to identify specific topics such as being a working mom and the poverty line, unearthing its roots, as she says. She just didn't know what it meant. This sounds more like an attempt to create the almost inevitable past-present framework in speeches in order to indicate a change, and thus create a dynamic narrative, organic even. Also, Meghan was born in 1981, and she says she was in school when this magazine made an impact on her. That means this supposed impact happened in 1987 or later. At that time, the kind of diversity she labels this as, in order to be popular within the group she's paid to say she advocates for, was very common. However, she has good reason to act like it was the 1950s. It keeps the agenda going and the money flowing. With her trivial observations about this magazine, it's easy to see that she wants this magazine to be the focus in the following. Thus, she's about to make the magazine sound much more profound than it actually was and is. Just like when she made a trivial experience in school sound groundbreaking.
When I was just 11 years old, I unknowingly and somehow accidentally became a female advocate. A pivotal moment reshaped my notion of what is possible. This commercial came on with the tagline for this dishwashing liquid, and the tagline said, "Women all over America are fighting greasy pots and pans." I remember feeling shocked and angry. I went home and I told my dad what had happened. And he encouraged me to write letters. So I did.
She tells the story all the time, no matter how misplaced it is.
11 years old, and I went to school here locally in LA. I mean, this commercial came on for a soap manufacturer.
Meghan says, "I knew that the significance of these magazines was important. I mean, it wasn't a one-off. She had a subscription," referring to her mother. Once again, she's playing with synonyms. When something is important, it's also significant. Thus, it's circular to say that the significance of the magazines was important, because she's presupposing what she should be attempting to prove, that these magazines were and are significant. And she hasn't, as she hasn't detailed any of the headlines she's given. The almost dramatic build-up, it wasn't a one-off, to the very trivial thing of having a subscription, is as misplaced as the exclamation mark after subscription. But then again, Meghan frequently dramatizes events. In the following, notice the intentionally underexposed room, adding to the raw, authentic emotions of the scene.
Again, I wasn't seeing it, but it's almost worse when you feel it through the expression of my mom or my friends or them calling me crying, just like, "Meg, they're not protecting you." And I realized that it was all happening just because I was breathing.
Because, of course, Harry actually covered Meghan's eyes. This doesn't feel like a staged moment at all. And of course, we feel sorry for Meghan about the interview she wanted and had carefully planned with Oprah. Getting the chance to complain about anything and everything, unintentionally showing us the entitlement that's really running her victim narrative.
You know, unlike what you see in the movies, there's no class on how to speak, how to cross your legs, how to be royal. There's none of that training. But even down to like the national anthem. No one thought to say, "Oh, you're American. You're not going to know that." That's me late at night Googling, what's the national, I've got to learn this. I don't want to embarrass them. I need to learn these 30 hymns for church.
Meghan says that these pages, which makes it sound like she had a close connection to the magazines, signaled to her that there was so much more than the dolled up covers and images that you would see on the grocery store covers. Because of course in 1987 or around that time, people hadn't been exposed to anything other than dolled up covers and images. It's interesting that she uses the word dolled up negatively, given her completely voluntary participation in a certain quiz show.
Meghan, open the case.
Which, of course, she complained about to another dear friend of hers, Paris Hilton, when it benefited her victim narrative, but also given her statements in this interview.
I got all dolled up for you.
Well, it's really working.
Craig doesn't even need to do anything. Meghan's doing the job for him.
You can pinch me, I'm real. See, oh yes.
Yeah.
So I grew up on the set of Married with Children every day after school for 10 years. I was there.
Wow.
I know. It's a very perverse place to grow up because I'm there in my school uniform, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then the guests...
It's a joke, kind of a joke.
However, despite this fact, I'm sure that Meghan will complain about this interview, eventually. It signaled to me that substance mattered, she says, which is kind of funny considering that we haven't heard anything substantial. This once again shows that this is the kind of get-together where buzzwords and platitudes are more than enough to earn you an award. Meghan says the presence of Ms. Magazine was more than a tool that I inherently learned from. It was an invitation to pay very close attention to the fact that change is just one action away. What action? What change, specifically? We don't know because she doesn't tell us. Also, these sentences aren't mutually exclusive, as she almost makes it sound like. If it made her realize that change is one action away, as she says in the second sentence, this was something she also learned from, as she says in the first sentence. Thus, this isn't an actual distinction, it's a way of phrasing it to make this trivial experience, in case it actually took place, sound more profound, which is a pattern in Meghan's language, emphasized by the word inherently. It reminds me of this nonsensical distinction.
I wasn't being thrown to the wolves, I was being fed to the wolves.
Meghan says these tenets have fueled Ms. Foundation's work for the last 50 years. However, if these tenets are as generic as Meghan's words that substance matters and that change is one action away, these are tenets you can apply to literally anything, any organization. She goes on to say that the organization pursues a world where everyone, truly everyone, is valued. Personally, I doubt that. In my experience and from all the analyses I've done, it's always the least inclusive people who feel the need to say they're inclusive. People who are actually inclusive, however you want to define it, are too busy being it to start reflecting on it publicly in order to sound morally good and superior. Also, there's nothing inclusive about including people who all think the same. That's called an echo chamber. Meghan actually uses the trivial experience of glancing at magazines as a reason for evolving into a grown activist, as she labels herself. Because she says, when I reflect on the time in my life, I can now connect the dots. However, what does Meghan's activism consist of? Mostly traveling to other countries and coming back to make inappropriate comments about empowerment on a tragic background.
Yeah, so last February actually, I went to Rwanda, which was incredible because Rwanda has the highest percentage of female political participants of any other country in the world. So 64% of their government is female. In the wake of, obviously, such a horrendous experience that they had. And in that, yes, so many of the men were lost in the genocide, so it gave women an opportunity to either succumb to that or to then find some strength and then mobilize in a way that was really empowering. And I think that's specifically what they've done, which is a great benchmark for what women all over the world could be doing.
The misalignment between the buzzwords Meghan's so careful to use and the events they describe once again underlines that it's the words themselves that are important in order to be popular with the right people. It's not the substance. Meghan claims that it became the chrysalis for the person she is today, which is the absolute best advertising for this foundation.
How to cross your legs. There's none of that trained. That's the national anthem. No one thought to say, oh, you're American, you're not going to know that.
It's also worth noting that Meghan doesn't tell us how it was the chrysalis, because again, it's all about the words. Meghan says she remains inspired by those around her. I'm sure Catherine and the entire royal family would agree. Meghan's very good at being accommodating and humble in new surroundings, always willing to learn.
I remember in the car and driving up, and he said, you know how to curtsy, right? And I just thought it was a joke.
Pleasure to meet you, Your Majesty. A few days before the wedding, she was upset about something, and it made me cry, and it really hurt my feelings. I wrote letters to his family when I got there saying, I am dedicated to this. I'm here for you. Use me as you'd like. There was no guidance as well, right?
Rarely have I seen such tolerance and inclusivity. Let's go on before I get too emotional. Meghan says that the narrative on repeat that surrounded her allowed her to recognize that part of her greater value and purpose in life was to advocate for those who felt unheard, to stand up to injustice, you all know it. It's the same kind of self-praise we've all been fortunate enough to hear before.
And in many ways at the time, I was probably a lot like each of you. Young, ambitious, advocating for the things I deeply and profoundly believed in.
It was at that moment that I realized the magnitude of my actions.
Suits is not what I never thought my life would be that awesome. I never thought that I'd have a show that went for this long. That's crazy. Every day I'm like, there's a fruit basket in my trailer.
We haven't even heard what the narrative is. Still, with the verb recognize, Meghan presupposes a pre-existing value in herself, which she just hadn't noticed before glancing at the magazines. How convenient. And she also makes sure to mention that this advocacy is merely a part of her greater value, because as we all know, there are so many other parts. Even the self-praise is generic. Generic terms are exposed for what they are by counter-questions like, who wouldn't describe themselves as people who say what's right? Who would want to say wrong things? It's interesting how many things have inspired her. In her UN speech, it was the soap commercial. In her One Young World speech, it was an unspecified, deep and profound belief. And here, it's the magazines. Meghan makes sure that each generic narrative fits the occasion, which is totally convincing. She says, whether your inspiration comes from a magazine on your coffee table. Here we learn why she mentioned this in the beginning of her narrative. Association, to sound relatable to other people, which I suspected right from the get-go. But you know, that's me in a nutshell. Always willing to say what's right, and always. No time. Okay, another time then. I just want to make sure that you all know I'm a good person. That's all. Let's continue with the final passages in a speech that just gets better and better. Meghan goes on with contrived claims, right out of a fortune cookie, like you can be the visionary of your own life, and daily acts of service and kindness, in advocacy, in grace, and in fairness. Wow, that's a lot. And it's not redundant at all. Every word is truly necessary. It's interesting that she mentions the word service, considering that she and Prince Harry, whatever's left of the guy, fled from a life of service. But I guess it's the thought that counts. Also, I believe Meghan when she talks about fairness. It was totally fair when she complained about having to learn a song that she, at that point in time, had only had 2 years to Google. Especially compared to the actual problems that the people she's paid to say she advocates for have. Obviously, Meghan's inherently learned by glancing at these magazines. Her actions prove as much. My dear friend Glow, Meghan says, this funny nickname, along with details such as Glow's clothing, establishes how close Meghan supposedly is to Glow. This reminds me of another funny nickname in a charming passage in one of Meghan's many empowering monologues, or interviews to use the official term.
She calls me Nutmeg, but she'll be like, Nutmeg, Just leave room for magic.
Meghan then performs association, making it sound and look like she's not alone in thinking this, but that she has an entire sisterhood behind her. Meghan's generic statements, however, make me wonder about the depth of this sisterhood she tries to establish by saying the word. I guess she relies on repetitions to make people believe this. Meghan says work doesn't have to be hard work, which she and Prince Harry have worked hard to prove to us all. People who are part of the same in-groups in society are always busy praising each other and giving each other titles and awards in order to keep the power in society. This is how you're allowed to speak, and this is what you're to consider good and bad. It calls the depth of these people's agenda and the reason why they get awards into question. And in many cases, it also calls the actual goodness of these people into question. That's the primary reason why I find a video like this important and significant to make. Make sure you check the playlist for many more videos about this case and other cases. And before you leave, click the like button and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.